Welcome to the PA Books podcast. PA Books is a production of PCN, the Pennsylvania Cable Network. This program features interviews with authors of books on Pennsylvania people, history, sports, business, nature, and politics. While the focus is always on Pennsylvania, topics like the Revolutionary War, the Battle of Gettysburg, the Industrial Revolution, the coal and steel industries, and authors like John Updike, David McCullough, and John Grogan have a universal appeal. We hope you enjoy this podcast.
This week on PA Books, the author of Growing Up Amish, Richard Stevick.
Richard Stevick, your book, Growing Up Amish, the Rumspringa Years, this is the second edition, and you write in the beginning, since the first edition, the scene has changed dramatically as thousands of youth in the large settlements are dedicated internet and Facebook users thanks to their sophisticated smartphones and e-savvy Amish peers. Mm-hmm. Now, young Amish with smartphones and Facebook accounts?
Mm-hmm. When I finished the first edition of the book, which was in 2007, I shifted somewhat to mental health issues and worked part-time at Green Pasture, which is a residential treatment center for troubled Amish people. It's associated with Phil Haven. So I put my youth studies on hold. And then in 2012, I got a call from my editor at Johns Hopkins and said, "Rich, what do you think about Amish youth on Facebook?" And I said, "What do you mean?" I had written 8 words, I think, in the first edition on telephones. That was it. And he said, "Well, there's an article in the Lancaster Sunday News by Gil Smart, and it's on Facebook Amish." And he said, "I think we're ready for a new edition, and I think that should be one of the things we look at." Well, I decided on the spot I wanted to do that. So I sort of retooled and moved back into this area and found out that it's alive and well. And how it came about, Amish youth, I guess, traditionally have had an interest in technology. And the fact that it's available and it's captivating and it's instant, all these things evidently appealed to them because we're talking about lots and lots of Amish youth on Facebook. Gil tried to get in touch with either 10 or 20 people on Facebook that had Amish-sounding names, and he tried to friend them, and predictably he didn't get one response.
They're allowed to have cell phones?
Allowed to have. They can get away with it. I would say probably no Amish parent would say, "We want you to have a phone, it's so convenient to have it." But during the Rumspringa period, there's more latitude. And a lot of youth take advantage of this latitude to get wired up or get online or go Facebook or whatever it is.
Were you able to friend some of them on Facebook or see what they put on there?
Eventually, yeah, eventually. Getting information on Amish adolescents is not an easy task. It's basically an area that Amish parents feel uneasy about because these young people are in that liminal period where they're not under the parental control as they were up until they were 16. So they're concerned about their youth, and they're not happy when they hear that their youth are involved in things. Many of them would rather turn a blind eye and hope that it goes away, that it'll be a fad and passing, and usually this does happen.
Instead of forbidding it?
They have to be careful because these youth as Anabaptist youth choose as an adult, meaning for them 18 or 19, whether to join the church or not. And a lot of parents worry if they push their youth too hard, that their youth will just leave and not become Amish. So they have to be cautious about how much pressure they put on.
Isn't there a concern that if they get too exposed to the non-Amish world that they will be lured away?
I would say you have just hit on the number one concern of Amish adults these days. I think out of all the issues that are around, I think probably the internet and smartphones are the things that they worry about most. And most parents have very little understanding. They know that pornography is available. That is their number one hot button issue as far as the internet. But they don't understand it, and they don't know what to do about it in many cases.
So you were able to friend some Amish kids?
Yes, I'm not sure how many Amish friends I have right now, Amish youth. When they join the church, they should not be my friend anymore. There are a couple that are still on. But my breakthrough came, I was actually, when I got the call from the editor, we were in Pinecraft, Florida, which is a whole nother story. It's the Amish snowbird capital in Sarasota. And I was there for 6 weeks, I guess, got the call from the editor. And I said, yes, I'd like to do it. So I had one 18-year-old friend of a family that I asked her if she'd be willing to come and talk to me about some of these things. And she said she would. She came over, my wife and I, it was just the three of us. My wife, who's also written on Amish things and studied Amish, my wife and she and I sat down. And we were talking for maybe 5 minutes. And I noticed that her eyes were going down as I asked questions.
This is an Amish girl?
This is a girl who has grown up in an Amish home, right? She was 18, so she was in the room, Springer. And she would answer the question, and then I'd ask her something else, and this happened for maybe 5 minutes, which was a surprise to me, because even my students at Messiah College didn't do that when we were talking. So I thought, let's find out what happens. So when she would start texting, then I would stop talking. And so she's texting, and she looks up and she said, oh, don't worry, I'm good at multitasking. That was my introduction to the world of the internet through her. She became a very close friend and consultant. She was my key to Lancaster County. At that time, she had probably 600 Facebook friends. Most of them had Amish names. But I don't know whether you know, there's a church called Spring Garden in Lancaster County that ex-Amish go to, or those who had Amish grandparents who have Amish-sounding names. So I didn't know whether these are Spring Garden people or whether these were brought up Amish or whatever, because most of the people with those names didn't look at all Amish. They didn't dress Amish. They looked like my Messiah College students.
The Amish girl who was texting, how was she dressed?
She was dressed Amish. Yeah, she looked Amish at the time we were getting together. Subsequently, I learned that she did that for work and she did that for church, but not too often otherwise.
So what did you learn about Amish kids by looking at their Facebook pages?
Mm-hmm. Well, I learned that visually it was hard for me. I should tell you first that she was my entree into Lancaster County Amish, because I ran off her 600 and whatever, 2 names, and asked her if she would be willing to identify who is Spring Garden, who has grown up Amish, who has left the Amish, who are church members. And she did that. She sat down and did for all 600 people. She told me at one point, she said, Rich, I don't want to take any more. I don't want any more Facebook friends. She said, that's just too much. Well, I forgot to look before I came today, but I'm guessing she has in excess of 1,000 now, is my guess. She also pointed out another thing the parents worry about, and then I'll get back to this. She said, I don't know what people find attractive about Amish girls, but she said, yesterday I had 16 people ask to befriend me, and she didn't know. Well, she's an attractive gal. She was dressed Amish, and who knows why this happened, but it's an example of the kinds of things that worry parents too.
And what do you find out on Amish Facebook pages?
You find out how they spend their weekends. You find out what sports teams they like, what sports they participate in, how their teams are doing, where sometimes where the parties will be. You find out what their favorite television programs are, their favorite movies.
They watch television?
Amish youth. Now we're talking about a segment, Brian, of Amish youth. We're talking maybe 20%, which are this is an atypical segment of Amish youth. Okay, so we're looking at those at the more extreme end. They would be basically, they would just blend in society the way they dress. They're conscious of fashions, Abercrombie and Fitch. One girl told me, she said, I had Abercrombie and Fitch a couple years ago, but she said that's past. She said the 16-year-olds are wearing that, so they're fashion conscious. I learned a lot of things about their style of dress. This was a crash course in popular culture also. I did not know what board shorts were. A lot of the guys, when they're playing volleyball in Florida, are wearing board shorts, which are sort of Bermuda-type shorts, but they're single colors without the patterns and all that stuff. I did not know what tankinis were. Do you know what a tankini is?
I'm afraid not.
A tankini, I think, it's a sort of a bathing suit with it's not a total bikini. It has some kind of a around the neck strap, I believe. So you know what they dress like. I learned about the wild end of the extreme. And again, not all youth who are on Facebook are into the wild behavior, but those who are into beer pong, I have to confess in my sheltered life, I had not known what beer pong was. I have learned. This was my crash course on pop culture, by the way.
So your book is subtitled The Rumspringa Years. Mm-hmm. So just a baseline, what is the Rumspringa and what do people misunderstand about it?
Okay. The Rumspringa is, generally speaking, starts at age 16. And it lasts, I guess a real marker for the end of it would be marriage. Now, not everybody marries, so that isn't a purely definitive. But that's when the typical Amish person stops the Rumspringa. Rumspringa doesn't denote, like many of the shows on TV show it as being a walk on the wild side or a perpetual spring break or Amish cut loose. It's not that way for most Amish, but there is a segment there. The parents release the students, their youth from the kinds of supervision often that they've had up until that point, and they're pretty carefully monitored up until the age of 16. At the age of 16, they start going to singings on a Sunday night. Singings for the typical Amish person, youth is the most common social event. And for one of our youth to go to one of their singings, they would wonder what in the world is the attraction. Because here are a bunch of youth sitting two sides of the table, boys on one side, girls on the other side, singing German songs, religious songs, that some of the youth don't even know what the words are. Maybe at halfway point, they will move into English hymns, that kind of thing. But there's not much interaction, there's not much carrying on in a typical singing. But it's a time now to be away, and they are now establishing themselves among their peers. Their parents aren't ordering their friendships or whatever. They're free. And ultimately, most Amish parents will tell you, ultimately the goal is to find their mate for life, and the singing is the arena to do that.
You say in the book at one point you quote a younger girl is saying, I'm counting the days till my 16th birthday. Mm-hmm. Is there something that happens on their 16th birthday or some ceremony or somewhere say, here you go? It's
not like the quinceañera in Mexico. There's no celebration. The boys do get a horse and carriage in most settlements. So that, again, it's a rite of passage to a degree. It's not the ultimate rite, but it's the first in the rites of passage.
So they know what one day they are under their parents' control and the next day they're not?
Next day, well, it's not that drastic. They will take liberties as time goes on. Although in some cases, I had a young person tell me that they said, when I was 15 and 364 days, I was this way, and the next day it was partying, drinking, carry on. That's not the norm, but that certainly is an experience of a significant minority of young people. So they don't have the constant supervision that they had in the past. And being with peers is a heady experience, plus knowing that probably my lifetime mate is in this group, this singing group, that I will find someone.
So do they dress differently once they start this
It depends.
period of time?
The majority do not dress appreciably different to our eyes. The Amish would notice some of maybe a girl would wear a gold pin, or they would have a little puffiness in the sleeves, or the sleeves might be shorter. Those kinds of things, maybe a little rouge for the girls. But that would be a typical Amish youth. The ones at the extreme extreme Rumspringa end would dress much more differently. The interesting thing, however, is despite their wildness, when they go to church or when they go to funerals or weddings or whatever, they dress in compliance with the standards of the community. So it's the one thing about Amish youth is when they're running around, as they say it, in Rumspringa, they're primarily doing it together. They're not doing it with outsiders. So I would say most young people are not saying, oh, this is my preparation to get into the English world. I don't think that occurs to most of them. But it is my chance to experience some things before I take the vows of the church and settle down and get married and become a stable Amish person.
Do they live at home?
Yes, they invariably live at home.
Do they have jobs?
Yes, they start working when their schooling ends at 8th grade, and then in Pennsylvania they go until they're 15 at what's called a vocational school, which is sort of a nominal experience. They write down what they did during the week and they learn German hymns and things. It's just once every 3 hours during the week. But after that, then they move into jobs. They'll start working at home. The girls will help their mothers. The guys may work on, if it's a farm, which is a minority experience anymore, the guys will work on the farm, or they'll go, by the age of 16, many of them are working with construction crews in helping. The work ethic is one of the core Amish values, and the Amish are miraculous at imbuing work habits in their youth.
Do they work for non-English companies?
Some do, and that's where, I don't know whether you recall, Brian, 1998, Lancaster County made the news when 3 young Amish men were accused of and convicted of selling drugs to the Amish people through their contact with the Pagans motorcycle gang, who worked, some of the young people worked for the Pagans in construction, and some of the Pagans worked, I guess, in Amish-owned companies. And so that's why they're sometimes leery of those contacts with the world. Now in Indiana, youth, as soon as they are of age, and I think it might be 18 there, they'll work in RV factories, trailer factories, right alongside of non-Amish people, English people as we call them.
So that's where they get the money to pay for the cell phones?
Yes, that is. In the past, probably as little as 15 years ago, 20 years ago, basically all of the money except an allowance skimmed off went to the family. It was when you came of age, then you could keep your own money. The parents often, if they were able to manage without that money, they would save it up for when the young person turned 21 or when they got married. But nowadays, that's not nearly as common.
How long a tradition is the Rumspringa? How long has it been in action?
I don't know.
Existence?
Nobody seems to know. In terms of the kind of wild Rumspringa, this has been going on since, I remember reading a New York Times article from 1909 where somebody had cut the tail off of Jacob Graeber's horse, and they had upset things and, sort of strong pranks, not violent kind of things, but it's been going on for 100 years.
Is it in all Amish communities?
And it depends how some of the Amish define Rumspringa a bit differently than I've been describing it to you. The New Order Amish, which opens a whole nother arena, the New Order Amish say they don't have Rumspringa. They do in the way that I described it, that there's less parental supervision and there's now the chance to look for a mate. New Order Amish basically do not have wild Rumspringa, and they're about 10% of the Ohio Amish. So it's a minority group. The Schwarzentruber Amish, who are on the other end of the spectrum, who are the plainest of the plain, they won't even ride in, they won't ask me to ride in my car, they won't use a telephone unless it's an emergency. They say they have no Rumspringa either. Their kids just go from being teenagers to being church members. But the fact of the matter is that pretty much they behave, the Schwarzentrubers behave the same as those who have the typical Rumspringa experience.
And New Order are more
New Order are more
technology?
They would, yes. New Order are more, I would say, evangelical Amish. So they have much more strict standards on smoking, drinking, courtship practices, technology, those kinds of things. It's interesting, Brian, that the plainer the group, the more likely they are to keep their young people, the more likely the young people are to become Amish, whereas the more liberal groups like the New Order are much more likely to have their people sort of drift out the top and go into some conservative Mennonite churches.
I want to read you something about that, because you
Okay.
say in your book, when young people go out, you quote an Amish man, when young people go out drinking and partying, an Amish man explained, they know that they're acting wrong and need to stop it before they come back. When they start going with the Mennonites, they begin to question the whole Amish way of life, and that's dangerous. Another man who eventually left the Amish concurred. My parents worried more about me visiting a Mennonite church than about my brother who was out partying and carrying on. I would be the one to come home with questions. Worse to hang out with the Mennonites than
You
to hang
picked
out
out
with
a very significant passage, because the Amish way traditions are very, very deeply treasured and kept, and the New Order people, for example, are much more reflective about their faith, I would say, than typical or Old Order, and may come up with questions such as, well, why do we do church services in German? I mean, why at least don't we do them in Pennsylvania Dutch? Now, they do them in Pennsylvania Dutch, but the issue would be, why can't we just do them in English? And some Amish churches tried to do English, and they left the Amish before it was done. I mean, they dispersed. So the language is probably key for their identity, for their separation. There are just a lot of things that enter in causing someone to be a devout or a committed Amish person. And getting in with the Mennonites causes them to raise questions such as, why do it in English, and how about the new birth, and what's wrong with assurance of salvation? These are some of the issues that the New Order people have raised. And it gets complex. I deal with it in a whole chapter on Amish faith and religion.
Who decides these things? Who decides what our community will believe?
It comes down in the genes, I guess. They're Anabaptist people. This really shapes a lot of their core beliefs, who they are. So it came down from the 1520s, when the Anabaptists broke away in the Radical Reformation, and they turned their back on the Catholic Church, and they turned their back on infant baptism, turned their back on the military, and decided that the community and giving oneself up to simplicity and giving himself up to the authority of the community. So the community decides it based on their understanding of scriptures and the traditions that have guided them throughout the years.
How often do schisms happen where one group splits off?
I don't know how often. There's a book out, Settlements That Failed, by David Luthi, a convert to the Amish, by the way. Settlements That Failed. And a lot of the settlements in that book were a result of schisms and breaking because of interpretation of Scripture or enforcement. Shunning has been a big issue that has caused divisions among the Amish. Most communities are not as strict as Lancaster County, for example, in what they call the strong shunning or the strict miting. There will be a way for people to join other churches, other Anabaptist churches in Ohio Amish, for example, without being put in the bond or shunned. But Lancaster County has been a bastion, a stalwart believer in strong shunning.
So if there's shunning, you have nothing to do with that person anymore?
It's not that black and white. There are certain restrictions in the scriptures. There's a verse that says if someone has left the faith that you should not even eat with him. And so if Amish who are in the bond, who have been shunned, go to a wedding, they will sit with people like me who are not members. They'll sit at a separate table. There'll be maybe a gap that big from one table to the next. And you might not even know a person is being shunned, depending on the settlement. Whereas in other settlements that are more conservative, if someone leaves, they're not invited to weddings, they're not invited to funerals. It's as if, almost like the Jewish Hasidic Jews, it's like the son died or the daughter died.
When you started studying the Amish, had you had any contact with Amish people before that?
I am such an unlikely person to have done this study. We moved to Lancaster County in 1966. This past winter has been a bad winter. The winter of '66 was really bad, and we were in upstate New York. And I said to my wife, I don't think we need to live here, and she agreed. And we came to Lancaster County then. We moved into a house built by an Amish builder, and one of my goals was to get to know an Amish person. And at that time, I had absolutely no success in developing relationships at all. It just was frustrating, and I cannot tell you, Brian, how many dozens of eggs I bought, hoping, no Sunday sales, eggs for sale, almost for sure it's an Amish or a horse and buggy Mennonite place. So I'd like a dozen eggs, hoping that someone would just invite me in, because I had no idea what the inside of their houses were like. Never an invitation. So I finally gave up on it. And it took someone at Messiah who was teaching a class on the Amish to allow me to get to know their friends, and entered into the Amish world, and have been there ever since and been learning. I teach a class on Amish life also.
Where?
At Messiah College. So we taught a course this spring. We had 9 students go live with Amish families in Ohio, and then live with Amish families in Pennsylvania.
How'd you find Amish families willing to have English?
Lots of footwork. But having established, once you establish yourself as a reliable friend among the Amish, unless you abuse it, it's a lifetime thing. So getting to the first place that my wife and I stayed was an Amish minister. Turns out he was had a good reputation among the Amish, and he became a bishop. And we're still friends. In fact, I'll be staying there tonight at their place. And so when I tell somebody I know David so-and-so, really, you're friends with him? Well, I have instant credibility. And so I've been able to learn about youth through those contacts over the years. And people have been willing to confide in me, knowing probably in some cases they felt more comfortable with me since I had nothing invested in the church when they needed to talk about some of their frustrations.
What are their houses like?
They're pretty much like any farmhouse, except no electricity. So they'll have, depending on the settlement, they'll have propane lights or Coleman lights. In Ohio, they have underground gas there, so they have gas lights. Some of the very conservative ones have kerosene lanterns.
Flush toilets?
Depends on the level. There are about a dozen levels of Amish. So the lowest level that's the term they use, the slowest or lowest level of Amish, they have outhouses, and they have no hot running water inside. It's sort of like Little House on the Prairie without the glamour. And then at the upper end, I've been in Amish homes with gold fixtures in their bathrooms, and I wouldn't recognize much the difference between their house and my house.
How many Amish kids did you talk to when you put this book together?
If we're talking both books, this would be a revision. I don't know, probably more than 100.
What do you talk to them about?
I talk to them about what kinds of things they enjoy doing and what's happening in the groups or gangs. Gangs are the names. It doesn't have the same sinister connotation as New York City gangs. But the youth groups, what's going on in the youth groups? What are the new youth groups? What's changing in the buggies? What's a good buggy horse? Can I go and see you buy your carriage? Just lots and lots of things. Of course, for this book, I did a lot of talking about the internet, electronics, and what their interests were there.
You have a phrase in your book, buggy gangs, which seems like an odd combination of words.
Yes, it is. That's southern Lancaster County. Southern Lancaster County is generally the most conservative part of Lancaster Amish. Right along between 340 and 30 is generally considered the most liberal part. So people down in Georgetown and Buck and all those places, those Amish are definitely more conservative. And most of those youth, or many of those youth, belong to gangs that have open tops. This was the way it was when we moved to Lancaster County. All the youth had buggies, courting buggies with open tops. And then I think maybe in about 68, the first youth started actually having closed-top buggies. And there was quite a bit of concern among the parents because who knows what's going on in those closed-top buggies, and they're not open for inspection. And they wondered if there was going to be a rise in sexual immorality and so forth. Nobody seems to have recognized that any of that changed. I mean, that there was a rise of any kind.
Do they date when they're doing this Rumspringa?
Yes, that's
like one-on-one dating?
That's one of the big attractions of Rumspringa, yes. Some settlements you don't date until you're 17, and some 17 and a half or 18. Some not until you're a church member can you date. But some, they start the very first night. 16, they go to the singing and they ask a girl to go home with them. And that's the start of their courtship. So courtship practices vary significantly. It used to be very secretive in the past. The suitors coming up and throwing corn or pebbles against the window once the parents were in bed. And the girl coming down to meet them and having a snack and whatever. But that secretiveness only exists now in the most conservative. So most people know who is dating whom.
Do they date outside the Amish community?
Dating non-Amish? That's probably the number one fear of Amish parents, that their child would date a non-Amish person. Because you can guess the likely outcome is if they really become serious and want to get married, decide to get married, the English person is not going to convert to the Amish. And if he or she does, it's much more likely that he or she will leave the Amish after a few years. So that's probably the biggest fear that parents have, that their kids will get involved with English youth.
How do they get to know English youth? How do they get to intermingle?
Well, the fast-track youth, they'll get to know them at work, and they'll invite the youth to their parties, to their huts. This was something I learned in this edition, that there are huts that some of the guys in Lancaster County and in Holmes County, Ohio, have. A hut is a building that they rent. It may be as large as your studio here. And they'll have a big screen TV, and they'll have a bar, and they'll have loud music, and they get together, socialize, have their dances there, and drinking and so forth.
There's drinking?
There's drinking among a considerable minority of Amish youth, yeah. I don't know whether this is part of their German heritage or just part of youth heritage. But there's a lot of, I would say probably 20%, 25% of youth probably imbibe on a regular basis. I just asked we had a young Amishman over to our house, single guy, 22, just this past week, and I asked him about that. And I said, your youth, many of them are binge drinkers. Every weekend they are drinking to excess. And yet I know of almost no Amish adults who appear to be alcoholics. And most of my Amish friends can't name alcoholics. How does this happen? I asked my friend David, the one that was my first host, David, what do you think? And he said, I think in English society, binge drinking often goes along with people who are self-medicating. I may be quoting him exactly. They're trying to get away from bad family situations or disasters in life or whatever. And he said, our kids generally don't have those to get away with. And he said, they're drinking to have a good time. And he said, I think maybe the dependency occurs when you're drinking to try to forget your troubles. This is an 8th grade graduate who said that, which is, I think, fairly perceptive.
Do they smoke?
Much less than they used to. When I came to Lancaster in '66, I would guess that probably 95% of the farms grew tobacco, and probably most of the farmers smoked cigars. It's probably 10% of that now. And I think Edward Koop had some influence on that, the Surgeon General under Reagan. I think a lot of Amish really didn't think about the seriousness of tobacco. And so it would be a minority. Now, young people, my cover, there's a young guy smoking.
I want to ask you about that. Because before this conversation, before we started rolling tape, you said that the cover photo was kind of controversial.
I've had some friends, not Amish friends, but conservative Mennonites say, "Oh, Rich, I don't like your cover," and it's a young man smoking, and he looks disheveled. He's probably going to church, and my my editor really wanted this cover. And my initial reaction was, no, I don't want to use this cover. It's sort of sensationalized, but it's not really. I thought I'll ask some of my Amish friends, and I showed them the picture. What do you think of this? He said, a lot of young people smoke, a lot of young guys smoked during Rumspringa. They didn't see a big issue at all. So then I reconsidered, and I decided if I could get the permission of this young man, that I would use the cover. Well, that was two challenges. One was getting permission. The other was finding him, because I had no clue who this was, and the photographer who took this had no clue either. So I started showing it to a few of my friends, and try South Grafdale Road. I think there's a guy there. Nothing worked. One Friday afternoon at Messiah Library, when I was working on my final stages of the manuscript, I, in desperation, called one of my Facebooked one of my friends and sent the picture and said, do you have any idea who this person is? And within 20 minutes, he answered and said, yeah, he works here with me. Really? So yes, he would get in touch. So a couple hours later, I got the call. Yes, this is so-and-so. What can I do for you? And I told him, I was hoping to use the cover. And he said, I'll get back to you in a couple hours. A couple hours later, he called. And he said, yes, he would do it. But he said, what's in it for me? Which I thought was pretty clever. Johns Hopkins doesn't usually provide money for covers. I said, I'll call them, and I called them. They really wanted it, and they said, okay, how about $50? I said, how about $100? They said, okay. So I called him back, and he said, yes. He said, the only thing I ask is that you don't tell my parents, and that you send me a copy of the book when it's done. So I said, that's fine, I won't do that. Well,
are his parents not likely to find out about this?
They probably know by now. That was on a Friday, Brian. He joined the church 2 days later on Sunday. If I had called him Monday, I know what the answer would have been. It would have been, no, I can't give you permission because I'm a member of the church. So that was a Rumspringa option, which was fascinating. It was a great experience to follow through on that.
That's one of the things you talk about, is because the smartphones have cameras built into them, and they take pictures of each other. I thought the popular perception was that Amish didn't allow pictures of themselves.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure that most Amish in Lancaster County is considered a progressive, liberal Amish settlement compared to a lot of settlements. And I'm sure that many Rumspringa youth in the past used their Instamatic cameras and whatever, but nothing to the extent that Amish with selfies. I didn't even know what a selfie was, Brian. Amish youth with selfies, lots and lots of them. Amish girls with duck lips. Do you know what duck lips are?
Afraid not.
I don't. I think I know what with the sort of that pucker, the pucker on their lips. This is a common thing on Facebook pictures in mainstream society for girls to have this puckering. I doubt that most of them consider it a sexual invitation. I think it's just what you see on Facebook.
And we talked about the extremes during Rumspringa and the extreme behavior, but you said most of them don't. Are there some who don't change their behavior at all during Rumspringa?
Sure. I would say the majority, even in Lancaster County, would belong to gangs or groups that basically dress like their parents. They do the kinds of things that their parents would hope that they would do. They don't go out partying. They're not going to the movies. They're not disobeying the rules. They're pretty much acting the way Amish parents would want them to act. So on a Saturday night, if they're dating, they may have a date at their girlfriend's house, and they'll maybe play games with the parents or with the siblings of the girl. On Sunday, they'll go to church, and they'll go to the Sunday afternoon volleyball tournament, volleyball games, and then the Sunday supper, and then to the singing Sunday night. And they're not in this extreme kind of behavior of drinking, partying, carrying on, that kind of thing.
When they play sports, do they get competitive with each other?
I haven't seen them competitive in trash talking and in your face. Amish guys are tremendous softball players. And they've become tremendous softball players by playing recess for 8 years in their schools, and then playing often in leagues. They have softball leagues in Ohio, Indiana, Lancaster County. These guys can hit it a mile. It is unbelievable. I would never want to be a pitcher in a softball game with Amish guys. You could get killed. They just brutalize the ball. They're very good.
And they follow professional sports teams?
Many of them do. Many of them do. If you go to their Facebook, they'll have, the Phillies or the Cleveland Browns or Indians or whatever. So they do follow. There are other sports. Lancaster County has a hockey league that Amish participate in. One of my Amish female friends said, "Rich, you don't want..." I said, "I should go see that." She said, "You don't want to go there." She said, "It smells in there." I guess it smelled like gym socks to her.
But hockey often involves a lot of hitting, and isn't that counter to...
And I have not seen a hockey game. I'm sure if hockey involves hitting, they're hitting. I'm sure. But my guess is that they're not getting mad at each other or trying to really injure each other.
Now, speaking of which, you say in my and this jumps around a little bit, but in my nearly 25 years of studying Amish adolescents, I have never personally encountered or even heard of a single case of an Amish young man hitting or beating up his girlfriend.
Mm-hmm. And I've asked that question repeatedly. And I think that's part of Anabaptist training of nonviolence, of non-resistance, and modeling in the home. Now there's abuse in the home. I know that there have been incidents in the home where husbands have hit their wives or hurt their wives or abused. But it hasn't come down to dating that I have ever heard of, and I've never had any. I don't think I've ever had anybody tell me of knowing about. And I've worked in mental health settings, so I would think I would have opportunity to hear that.
You refer to a rehab center that they have that is, let's see if I can find it here. When certain youth exhibit repeated destructive or rebellious tendencies beyond the control of their parents, the adults may resort to more serious attempts to bring the resistant child, usually a son, into compliance, and they have faith-related rehabilitation centers. Mm-hmm. What happens there?
There would be regular disciplined getting up and doing chores and working around and so forth, the kind of things that kids generally do anyhow at their home. There would be a lot of Bible studies, probably emphasizing giving oneself up. That's a very common, I need to learn to give myself up. I think the scholars call it Gelassenheit, which means that willingness to give up your own way for the community's sake. The community is more important than my little whatever I am and whatever I want. The community is where the ultimate authority lies. Well, the ultimate authority, they would say, would be Scripture and God. But on earth, the community is all important.
Are there times when a person's behavior during Rumspringa is so wild that the community does not want them back?
Yeah, there would be, and this would be the time that they might send them to one of the rehabilitation. In the past, they would send them sometimes to a relative who had a reputation of being good, being firm but fair, and just to get them out of the home. Now we're talking a minority, really a small segment. But the Amish try to deal with these things themselves, if at all possible. They're not real happy to get children and youth services involved, or the state, or they have a distrust of government that goes back to their years of persecution and martyrdom. So they know what can happen if a government goes awry. And so they would rather deal with it themselves.
How widespread is a drug problem among Amish youth?
I don't think anybody knows. I don't know how widespread it was. I know virtually all adults say that it is much less now than it was 20 years ago, before the drug bust. I think the drug bust in Lancaster County was one of the things that precipitated some serious changes.
You have a chapter in Amish schools in your book, and you say that most of the teachers are teenage girls. Mm-hmm. So you have teenage girls going through Rumspringa and teaching school at the same time?
They would be doing that, that's right. And these would be girls that have a lot of acceptance in the community. The adults, they're screened to make sure that they are supportive of Amish values, of Anabaptist teachings and so forth. They want someone who's smart, somebody that can keep order. I cannot imagine. I've been to one-room schools enough, 8 grades to try to coordinate that day after day. I would not want to go to a school that I was in charge of for 8 grades, but many of them have exceptional organizational abilities and presence to be able to bring it off. The young man I was talking to the other night that I mentioned earlier, he started teaching school at the age of 15 3/4. In other words, his oldest students were just maybe a year and a half younger than he was. And he taught for 6 years. And there's in Franklin County, a young girl started at the age of 15. And she had 3 first graders, and she had, I think, 25 students. She had her sister help her. I mean, that is an incredible level of maturity to be able to bring that off.
What do they teach in those schools? What are the important subjects?
Basically what they've been teaching for the last 100 years. It's reading, writing, arithmetic. They'll have music, singing. They'll have maybe simple art in some of the schools. Science is not a popular subject. The Amish equate evolution and science. And so they may do nature study, but they don't do really formal science at all. And their kids come out, their goal is not to prepare them for this world, it's to prepare them to be good Amish people and prepare them for the next world. And the kids come out with exceptional poise in terms of work, being able to be independent workers, to be providers. I don't know any Amish who are living on the dole. It would be almost unbelievable.
You say toward the end of your book, the Amish, at least in Western societies, are arguable the masters of transmitting their culture to their sons and daughters. Mm-hmm. How do they do that? With all these other distractions and with the Amish kids, when they go through Rumspringa, exposed to everything that's in the world?
Brian, that's the thing that's kept me studying this subject for the last 20-some years, how they do it. And they would say they do it by example as much as by precept. So they have responsible families. They grow up, generally speaking, in intact families. If something gets really out of line between the husband and the wife, the church will try to work it out, to intervene. If financially, if a doctor's bill comes along and it threatens to destroy them, the community will have whatever it takes to get them. So it's a field that's just ripe for growth. And the kids identify with their parents. There's a lot in the Amish families that I'm most acquainted with. There's a lot of affirmation and love in the home. There's not a lot. I rarely ever have heard of Amish say, "Oh, I love you," to their children. But it's just so evident that there is love in the home. I think that strong family bond helps to explain the retention. There are some other things that would cause them to stay. I think certainly some scholars say the fear of shunning, that if you do leave once you've joined the church, then you're subject to being put in the bond. And that would be certainly a deterrent to some. In certain of the very conservative communities, they're taught that if they break their promise, it's like divorcing God, and they would feel that they would go to hell if they left the Amish. So that is a deterrent in the very plain communities. But I think the bonding with the parents and children is a key to bringing them back. And I hear some Amish say, I wouldn't want to be out in the world with its divorce and its drugs and its this and its that. So a lot of us had thought that they were just longing to be like us. It's not true.
And you said that it's possible to convert to the Amish community?
It is, yes. I know a few converts. I studied Pennsylvania German from a convert who had learned Pennsylvania German as a child.
And were they motivated by the desire to get away from the world?
They had multiple motivations. The Amish worry about converts being motivated to marry their daughters. That's one of the things they worry about, and I'm sure that has happened. But I think there are people who are interested in kerosene lanterns and horses and Little House on the Prairie. That's attractive to them, and somehow this will be a simple life, and we won't have the pressures of our society. Some, I think, religiously feel that this is more a New Testament. It's a simplicity of life that Jesus would approve of. Some are attracted to, I'd say, to a young woman, especially guys outside coming in. So there have been 300 converts in the last couple of generations, 300 to the Amish. Do you have any idea how many might have stayed Amish out of the 300? It was 100 have stayed, which is pretty impressive. 1 out of 3 have stayed. But it's not an easy life. Physically, the work is demanding. You don't have the family structure to support you like those who have grown up in the society.
You talk in your book about a couple of television programs that have nominally focused on the Amish. Amish in the City and Amish Mafia. Mm-hmm. What's your reaction to those, and did you get any reaction from the Amish community about them?
It's interesting that some of the young folks have Amish, and the Amish Mafia is one of their likes of TV programs. But as one young person said, Rich, she said it would be funny. It would be funny, Amish Mafia, but if it weren't that so many people believe that it's true. So I don't know anybody who has any knowledge of Amish that would believe that there's much of any truth in it. Amish in the City was the first reality show that came, and it's probably, in my judgment, one of the most authentic of any of them. These were 5 Amish young people who went and lived in Hollywood in a hillside mansion with 6 English young people. There was a big objection by some people who liked the Amish, saying that they were going to be exploited and made to look silly. And it turned out just the opposite, that the English young people were so entitled, so nasty, so whatever, and the Amish people were so interested in learning that it was a reversal of roles. And it may have been scripted that way in a sense, too.
Has Amish tourism changed the Amish community?
I'm sure it has, especially in the big centers like Holmes County and Lancaster County and northern Indiana, because a number of businesses will be dependent on tourist dollars. But I'd say generally speaking, the Amish separate themselves from the tourists. I know in Lancaster, they try to avoid going into intercourse on Saturday morning just because it's such a jam and there's so many people and maybe so many questions. I know of Amish people that have had tourists come into the back porch and look in the windows. They've gone into the garden, looked through the garden. A priest who had Amish friends, he told me this. He was in a buggy with his Amish friends in intercourse at the corner of 772 and 340, and as they get ready to pull out, a camera came in and flashed right in their face. And when he told me that, my only consolation was realizing that when they developed the picture at that time, they would have said, I didn't know the Amish were Catholic, because here was this priest with a stunned look on his clerical collar.
Now, you said earlier on that the Rumspringa tends to ends with marriage. How does that happen? How does the courtship and proposal and marriage?
Oh my. It's not secret anymore. Most Amish do not condone their children dating around. They're hoping that the person that you date first is someone you've really thought. And these young people usually know who the others are, so they know their values and some of their intricacies, etc. But they would really look for someone compatible and just start developing the courtship. And that means in typical Amish communities, dating every other Saturday night, and then the Sunday activities.
Do they ask Dad's permission to propose?
Generally speaking, they do. Dads like to do that, to have them ask, but some don't do that. Again, the community will be supportive of a young couple who are dating. Their dating probably will last from 6 months to a year and a half. And then the marriage used to be in just the fall, but that's changing. There's so many examples, for example, in Lancaster County, so many marriages in the fall, they couldn't handle them all. One of my friends, minister friend, had 25 invitations for weddings in the fall. There were like 12. At that time, there were 12 days you could get married, and he had 25 invitations. He said it was awful. I said, David, you folks are smart people. Why do you do this? Well, it's always been done that way. But they are changing, and now there are March marriages and June marriages and so forth.
What do they do about out-of-wedlock pregnancy?
Well, generally speaking, the couple will get married. If they're church members, they'll be put into the bond for 6 weeks. They'll repent. And my sources tell me that this kind of sin is not probably any worse than any other sin. And they're supported by the families, by the community. And at least my understanding is that there's no stigma that lasts all the lifelong time. Now, if it would be a girl impregnated by an English boy, that would be a different story. They would probably want her to remain single or give the child up for adoption or whatever.
You say that in case of a pregnant bride, they do a quick wedding, a small wedding, but then a deacon in a large settlement reported that young women who are in the first trimester of pregnancy will occasionally slip by with a more elaborate wedding. When the deacon and the bishop ask the couple whether they have had a pure courtship, they lie just so they can have a big wedding.
I was told that by a highly respected Amish minister. And I went to a wedding that was exactly like this. It was there were 600 people invited to the wedding. And turned out, the father told me, 3 months later, well, she didn't tell the truth. She was pregnant. But the family accepted the baby, and they were put into the bond again.
Now, once someone is baptized, once they reach the end of Rumspringa and they go through baptism, is all the stuff they did during Rumspringa forgiven? It's all wiped clean?
I'm sure people remember things with varied emotions. But ideally, that's what it is. The slate should be swept clean. And some Amish have expressed the idea that some of the wildest ones seem to settle down and make some of the most stable community members. Now that's an anecdotal thing. But I know that strain of belief exists for some people.
You talk about how the Amish youth and the Amish community has changed in the 20, 30 years you've been studying it. Can you predict what's going to happen? I mean, what challenges do they face? What do they have to deal with, and how might they accept things or not accept things?
I'm not very good at predicting, because in '66 I predicted that the Amish would be extinct by the end of the century, because I had heard of all this running around and terrible things that were happening. I had no clue what I was talking about, of course, and instead of expiring, they quadrupled in that time period. So I'm not ready to make a huge prediction. I can say that I worry about the same thing that the Amish ministers and parents do, and that's the impact of the internet. Is it possible, as one Indiana Amish minister asked me, is it possible for a group that's been trying to maintain separation from the world for hundreds of years now to have it right there? And he held his hand out with the cell phone.
Yeah, you have an Amish friend told me, a middle-aged woman sighed to me just recently that it's so hard to have an argument at a family gathering anymore because whenever discussion questions arise, the kids whip out their cellies and Google it.
That's exactly what I was told. And it is widespread. My epilogue is where I really deal with this. Is it possible to remain plain and simple while being exposed to the internet for those formative years? And I just wonder. I hope I live long enough to see.
And we'll have to end it at that note. We're out of time, and we've been speaking with Richard Stevick. He is the author of this book, Growing Up Amish, The Rumspringa Years. Thank you very much.
My pleasure, Brian.
You've been listening to a podcast of PA Books, a production of PCN, the Pennsylvania Cable Network. We'd like to hear from you. Our email address is pabooks@pcntv.com. Like us on Facebook to learn more about PA Books.